Part 2 is about communities, and communities are groups of species. So what we're going to be looking at is the interactions that happen between all kinds of species in an environment, and that's what a community is. Whereas a population is a group of individuals of the same species, a community, which is the next level of ecology, is the interactions and the potential interactions of communities, so multiple species. Now here in this image you can see a variety of organisms that are interacting. Clearly something has just happened. So there is a dead zebra, so that could be organism number 1. So that's one interaction. The lion, that's organism number 2, is one of the organisms that perhaps is responsible for that kill, and the zebra is the food source. You have 3 and 4 scavengers, and these scavengers are interested in getting their share of this meal. Plus, in the background, there's a herd of something. Don't know exactly what that is. And then, of course, all through here, there are going to be insects that eventually, or detritivores, organisms that eventually cause the decomposition of the zebra. There's lots of plants and so on. So this is already, just by looking at this one picture, with only a couple of organisms that are active, that is a very complex community. And so when we're looking at these interspecific interactions, which are those between two different species, then we can classify them in 3 different ways. Now, when we look at these, the signs here, positive, positive, plus, plus, that means whatever the interaction brings with it, both individuals, both species in the interaction benefit. So plus, plus, both benefit. Plus, minus means that one benefits and the other one doesn't. Now, one benefits, the other doesn't. In this case, the negative could have been the zebra, right? And the positive could have been basically the predators. There are also instances when you have minus-minus interactions, and that would mean that there is some level of interaction where neither benefits. And this is what we would call competition, which means that the presence of both in the same area helps neither. And often that results in one of them having to leave or literally having to die out. So those are the basic classifications for the interactions. Now, if you look at the mutual benefits, you can imagine a variety if you think of plants and pollinators, obviously. Organisms that get along, one helps out the other, so there's lots of examples. The plus minus is the classical predator-prey interaction. And predator-prey in this sense includes if you as an herbivore, that means a plant consumer, eats a plant. Because the plant is going to die, that's negative, and you're going to live, and that's positive. And so the business with minus-minus, that would then be competing for a common resource. Now we're going to look at these. We're going to look at examples of these, and on this picture, I hope it becomes clear. The background there, the background is a coral. And before I bring out the rest of the text, I think you'll see that there are all kinds of interesting colors in that coral, and you may notice that there are some green tips on these corals. And corals, in fact, have long been considered the classical case of a mutualistic relationship, where the corals and the organisms that live inside of the corals and help the corals are benefiting from the arrangement. And so if you look at the inside of healthy corals, and that nowadays is an important thing to remember, healthy corals, there are fewer and fewer of those around, you have a set of photosynthetic algae. And these algae are called zooxanthellae. And these zooxanthellae are inside the cells of these corals, inside the tissues, I should say, of the corals. Now, clearly, when the zooxanthellae photosynthesize, they produce oxygen and sugar. That's a byproduct of photosynthesis. And they themselves will use some of it, but they produce more than they can use, and so they give some of it off to the coral. So the coral can gain energy because they will participate in the sugar that these zooxanthellae produce. In exchange, the zooxanthellae gain shelter. When the coral metabolizes the sugar, it produces carbon dioxide. It also produces other kinds of products, things like ammonia, and of course a solid base, a protected area from which they have light. And so the idea is that this is an ideal arrangement where the coral benefits and the zooxanthellae benefit. And of course the zooxanthellae, ultimately, because of the different pigments, they are the ones that make corals one of the brightest things down in the shallow ocean. Now, it does happen periodically that, presumably because of some environmental shock, the coral expels the zooxanthellae. That's a problem. It's called coral bleaching, and it may actually kill the coral. The coral is being stressed, the argument goes, and whatever environmental stress has befallen it will cause it to expel the zooxanthellae. It won't have the resources to survive, and coral bleaching results in the death of the corals. Now, here's an issue, and this was something that one of my friends from college actually is working on. He is a coral researcher based in Kenya, and he does coral research on coral bleaching throughout the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Those are very large bodies of water that are connected. And one of the things he and some of his teams have been working on is whether this idea of mutualistic relationship between corals and zooxanthellae is actually true, or whether perhaps it is a kind of a hidden predatory experience. Now, this plus-minus arrangement in general means that one benefits and the other either is killed or loses some of its resources. And so if you ask the question of what actually is happening with the corals and their zooxanthellae, you may end up with this scenario. The zooxanthellae, which are independent little organisms, are attracted to the coral because the coral emits quite a bit of carbon dioxide. And it is close to the surface, which is where these zooxanthellae would live. They're photosynthetic, so that means they need sunlight. And these emissions from the coral are so attractive that they move towards the coral. Well, corals are actually able to grab small organisms. That's one of the things they do. They have these little sticky polyps, and they bring in their food. Well, what if they bring in the zooxanthellae and imprison them in their tissues? So rather than having the zooxanthellae want to be with the coral, maybe they're being held there. And so literally the zooxanthellae become enslaved. They produce the coral's food, which is great for the coral, but the zooxanthellae would much rather be someplace else. And this is why, when there is shock, the coral expels the zooxanthellae. When there are, for example, high water temperatures, then the zooxanthellae are able to break free. You see, it doesn't make any sense if there is a shock to the system that the corals would expel their food source. I mean, why would they do that? When there is an emergency, you try to keep all your resources close by, right? So there is no physiological reason to expel your food source. But if the food source wants to leave, then maybe you can't hold it in again because of the environmental shock. And experimentally, they have now shown that it appears that the coral literally hold in these zooxanthellae, and of course that helps these corals produce these wonderful coral reefs, but it may actually not be a mutually beneficial situation. It may actually be a type of a predator-prey interaction where the coral is simply holding the zooxanthellae as their slaves, literally. Now, The more traditional way to look at this plus-minus interaction is to have a predator who kills and eats the prey. That's basically the classical plus-minus. Of course, there's lots of it. That clearly directly affects the survival of both, and as a consequence of having this very close-knit interaction between many predators and their prey items, there are many adaptations out there. On the side of the predator, you'll find that predators do really well at tracking down, hunting, killing of organisms. So if you think of, the big predators, lions, tigers, bears, they're actually really good at what they do. Now, on the side of the prey, you'll find that there are lots of adaptations for avoiding predation. And those are also very critical. I mean, all of these things tie into this Darwinian idea that it's all about survival and reproduction. If you don't survive, you can't reproduce. Therefore, survival is one of the strongest things that natural selection is going to act on. So any little adaptation that you have that allows you to survive is going to be favored by natural selection. Now, predation does include herbivory, which means plant eating. And this is something that's interesting because, of course, there are a lot of ways by which you can find nutrition, and people in particular sometimes differentiate between eating meat and eating no meat. And this is a choice, and it's perfectly respectable. But from a natural point of view, if you look at this from a biological perspective, it's predation no matter which way you turn it. And really, it's difficult to decide from a biological perspective which one is more environment friendly. Now, clearly, when it comes to eating cattle, that is eating beef, that is probably one of the least environmentally friendly kinds of meats you can eat because of the habitat destruction that comes from raising cattle. So that is an issue, but it is not something about whether one type of predation is better than another. So just remember, herbivory, eating your salad, that's also a form of predation. So let's take a look at some of the predator adaptations, because of course there are lots of it. And anything to do with finding and subduing a prey is what these adaptations would be. So let's see, what do you have? Acute senses, that's pretty obvious. You'll find that things like claws, teeth, fangs, stingers, poison, anything, ensnarements of various types, all of these kind of things are going to be predator adaptations. Speed and agility, you'll find that the fastest organisms on the planet are predators. You'll find that the ones that have the best vision on the planet are predators. Now, they are, of course, as a consequence, a variety of defenses, because all the things that I just listed for you, if they are deadly, then you have to try and figure out how to avoid them. Now, one key way to avoid them is simply hiding. And so down there you can see this species of frog. That's a leaf mimic. And when you try and find these in the jungle at night, they are really difficult to find because they literally look like a leaf. The only way you could find them is by following their call. The males, these are frogs, so the males call. But they don't call so that you can hone in on the call, because they call maybe once every 2 minutes. And they go, whoa. And you go, okay, where did that just come from? Whoa. So the best you can do is wait and then shine your flashlight around to see approximately where it came from. And if you're lucky, you'll see eye shine, because these things are big enough that they have red eyes. And then you can go and find it. Now, these adaptations tend to be things that co-evolve. And so as you have a better adaptation as a predator for finding and subduing, you'll find that prey will end up adapting something that's going to avoid the predators. So passive defenses are key. If you can't be seen, then you can't be hunted down. And these include things like toxins, spines, thorns, cryptic coloration, especially, of course, if it's a toxin and the predator will catch you and spit you out, that's all right, but it may cause injury. Spines, they won't get to you. Thorns, those kinds are lines of last defense. But there are also a lot of active defenses, including behavioral ones, such as running away, obviously, fleeing and hiding. So not just running, but also actually running into something, a burrow, for example. Fighting back. Alarm calls. This is very effective when you have a population that is needing to be warned. Mobbing. This is what's happening to this snowy owl, where the snowy owl is being mobbed, and you will see this outside here sometimes, where the smaller birds will mob the larger ones when it gets into the area where they're nesting. And even things like distraction displays, where the adult bird, it could be either a male or a female, will pretend to be injured and draw the attention of the predator, and then once the predator is distracted and is moving away from the nest, then suddenly that bird will take off. And it's quite impressive how they do this. I mean, it's happened to me several times, and then, of course, being human, you know, there must be a nest nearby, and so you backtrack a little bit, and then you can find the nest. But most predators wouldn't be able to do that. Now, among the structural and chemical defenses are lots of interesting ones. Things like porcupine quills, those are obviously pretty serious. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to catch a porcupine, but you have to do that very carefully because they really hurt. Chemical defenses, obviously, things like the odor of a skunk. Now, some of you probably have experienced that before, and that's pretty nasty. So if you're a predator and you get sprayed, you'll know it. And then toxins like in these little frogs. Now, many times you'll find that there is a coloration associated with them. If you look at both the porcupine and its quills as well as the skunk, you'll realize that their coloration is black and white. And that is a form of a sort of a flashy coloration. Now, in the environment, you tend not to see black and white things that are so bright. I mean, black and white, it really stands out. And so that's not necessarily a warning in the sense it's just recognition. Whereas when you're looking at the color pattern of these little frogs, you'll say, wow, that's pretty bright. If it's bright in nature, one would assume, stay away. That's why we have bright red exit signs and bright red stop signs and things like that. Those are warning signs. And so, obviously, if you have that kind of colorful sign, it means you have to be able to see color. And birds do see color. So, if you have an avian predator and you're one of those little frogs, it may be helpful for you to escape. Of course, if you're a spider and you don't see color, then, well, the frog's color doesn't affect you. There are also a couple neat twists when it comes to these kinds of interactions, and one of the neatest, I think, is called mimicry. Mimicry means that there is an adaptation between two different organisms where something that is not dangerous mimics something that is. And so in this case, what we're looking at is a snake, obviously, on the right, and the back end of a caterpillar on the left. Now, if you look at the back end of the caterpillar here, you can see there are the eyes, which are essentially like these, even with the framed by yellow. You can see the nostrils right there. You can see the tip of the snout, and you can see the rest of it, and it looks as if it even has scales on the top of the head. But that's not a head at all. It's the back end. And so clearly the caterpillar would be something that's relatively juicy. Here is one of the feet of the caterpillar, and so the head sticks under here. And it mimics a snake. Now, birds would like to eat caterpillars because they're nice and juicy. But they're not going to touch this one because it looks like a snake, which would like to eat the bird. And so this is called Batesian mimicry. Batesian mimicry means that the harmless species, in this case the caterpillar, mimics the harmful model. So that's called the hawk moth larva, and it mimics the snake's head. But we're not done with mimicry, because we also have Mullerian mimicry. And in Mullerian mimicry, you sort of have the color pattern of the one group also include a warning for all the other ones that look like it. Now clearly, if you have ever encountered a yellow jacket, and then you would go into a tropical rainforest and you don't know anything about what kind of insects there are and which might be harmful, if you saw something that looked like a yellow jacket, you would probably not try and pick it up. And that's only because your experience with yellow jackets here makes you aware that this bright yellow, black, yellow, black, yellow, black color pattern could be something that's harmful. And that's Mullerian mimicry. In this case, you have the cuckoo bee on the left and the yellow jacket on the right. Now, they both can sting, so they are both harmful in that sense. But if you know anything about bees, when they sting, they actually leave their stinger behind, right? And so they sacrifice themselves for the group, if you will. An individual bee will do that. So even though they can sting, the bee might get a little bit of an advantage by being mistaken for a yellow jacket, because yellow jackets can sting multiple times. And if organisms have learned about that that yellow and black color pattern, then they might stay away and leave the bee alone. So Batesian versus Mullerian mimicry are very important. There's also another kind of predator-prey interaction that is a little bit more insidious, and that's between the parasites and their hosts. Parasites or pathogens and their hosts. And these are also predatory relationships, because the parasites are using their host for nutrition, so they benefit and the host does not. And pathogens like bacteria, the bacteria live and they make you sick, right? So clearly there's that plus minus still. Now, parasites are animals that live inside or on a host, and they simply steal the host's nutrients. Tapeworms are examples, mites, ticks, leeches, any of those kinds of things are parasites when they take away some of your nutrients. Pathogens are things that cause diseases, and they can also live in or on a host. And so anything like bacteria, viruses, fungi that give you athlete's foot, protists that give you amoebic dysentery, those are all pathogens, and clearly there's a plus-minus relationship. Good for them, bad for you. And then lastly, we have interspecific competition, and that's the minus-minus. So we dealt with plus-plus, we dealt with plus-minus, now it's minus-minus. And competition occurs when two types of organisms have identical resource needs. Now, you yourselves may experience competition because you're competing for jobs, you're competing for parking, you're competing for access to enrollment in classes, so there is competition even within one group, but this is now when we're looking at different species. Now, when you want to figure out what a species needs and you create a list of all the things that it needs, then you are basically defining the ecological niche of that species. That niche includes all the abiotic requirements and all the biotic requirements of the organism. And it's a little bit like saying, okay, this is the organism's job. This is their area of expertise. This is what they do. And that's their ecological niche. Now, there is something called the competitive exclusion principle. The competitive exclusion principle states that if two organisms have identical ecological niches, then one is going to outcompete the other. So you cannot have two organisms with exactly the same requirements in the same place. And this was a hypothesis that was discovered and tested by Dr. Gauss. This is a picture of Dr. Gauss. And he ran a series of experiments on this principle, and he used these little things called paramecia. And the paramecia that he used were Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum. These are relatively common in most pond samples in Europe and even in North America. And he found that if you run these as separate experiments, so you try and figure out, first of all, what does the one need and what does the other need, and once you have figured out that they both work in a certain nutrient medium, then you can grow them separately and you can find their growth curves. So the growth curve means first there is relatively rapid growth, and then they peak out at a certain carrying capacity. However, if you grow them together, then what you find is the same initial growth, but after about 4 days or so, you realize that Paramecium aurelia keeps growing, whereas Paramecium caudatum declines. And after a couple of weeks, you have essentially none of the Paramecium caudatum left, so these guys die, and these guys live. So this is a classic experiment, and you could do this on a variety of organisms that you'd think might live together well, but you sometimes end up with surprises. They don't live together well at all. In fact, in some cases, like with these, this is a way by which you can verify whether they are different species too. Because it's not like one part of the population is going to die and the other one is going to live. No, they must be, therefore, two different things. And so that's the competitive exclusion principle. Now, all of these relationships feed into what's called trophic levels. Trophic levels are basically an indication of where in this incredible diversity of organisms you exist in terms of feeding. Trophic, that word has to do with feeding. And so we're looking at food chains. Now, these food chains also tie into energy levels. The food chains are based on the plus minus, the predator-prey interactions, and based on these you can determine what the predator will get from the prey in terms of energy. So it ties into energy flow in an environment. And so what the food chain ultimately gives you is a sequence where energy is transferred from a lower trophic level, which is where the perhaps the producers in this environment come from, to the different levels of consumers. And so if you start with these food chains, and here on the left is the terrestrial and on the right is the marine food chain, you start out with producers. You always start out with producers. They are the basis for all the rest of life. We are also tied into producers. Many of our resources, including the oxygen we breathe, comes from plants. So we are entirely dependent on plant life for our existence. And that's something that most people don't understand. We are entirely dependent on plant life for our existence. And it is worth not forgetting that. So producers, we start out with the producers. Now the producers produce a certain amount of nutrition for us. So in addition to oxygen, they produce sugars and so on. And there are primary consumers. Now in this case, shown on the left for the terrestrial food chain, there's an insect, a grasshopper, and that grasshopper is an herbivore. And of course, that herbivore can eat some of the plant, and therefore it becomes the primary consumer because it's kind of first in line. It feeds directly on a producer. Now, if you or I eat a carrot, then we occupy that position vis-a-vis the carrot. The carrot is a producer, it's a plant, and if we eat it, we are going to be primary consumers. Now, one step up, you have a carnivore. In this case, the rodent eats the herbivore from before, eats the grasshopper, and so this rodent is a secondary consumer. Now, when you or I eat a piece of beef, let's say, then we would be secondary consumers. The cow is who ate the grass, and therefore that would be the primary consumer. And so you can see that organisms don't always have the same trophic level when they feed. They could be different levels, especially organisms with a broad variety of needs when it comes to diet, like ourselves. And then it goes into the tertiary consumers. In this case, the snake, the rattlesnake eats the rodent, and then perhaps quaternary consumers, and there you have a hawk eat the rattlesnake. Now there is a limit to how many levels you have. That's pretty much it. And there really isn't anything out there that is going to hunt down and kill the hawk and nothing else. So there are really no quaternary consumers, or whatever the next level might be. Now, hawks do die, and they do get consumed, but those hawks, they get consumed by detritivores. Those are the kind of things that make them decay, and those detritivores then return the nutrients to the soil where it can help the producers. So that's basically how the cycle ends. Now, if you look at this in the marine food chain, obviously you can do the same kind of thing. You can look at phytoplankton, zooplankton, various types of fish, and then you end up with a killer whale, for example. And in that case, perhaps size is important as well. But those are the food chains. And so you can imagine yourself perhaps being a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, maybe a tertiary consumer, because we do eat tuna, for example. So if you ate tuna, which comes from phytoplankton, zooplankton, and smaller fish, then at that moment we would be tertiary consumers. But on the mammalian side, there is not so much. I mean, we don't tend to eat at that level. We can. I mean, people do eat snakes, and people probably do eat birds of prey, but that's very, very rare. It's not a normal aspect of our diet. Now, the next slide simply gives you the rundown of what I just explained, so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but you do need to just remember the terms. So we have the primary producers, then we have the primary consumers, and then we have secondary or higher levels of consumers. And then, as I mentioned, you have the detritivores, which are the ones that decompose and basically return the dead material back to the soil. So that's how the food cycle may work. Now, if you put it all together, if you take all these trophic levels and all the different organisms in an environment and make that community come alive as a food web, then you end up with something very complex. There are very few organisms that are entirely dependent on a single food source. And if that happens, then those tend to be organisms that are relatively rare, not very widely distributed, and nowadays probably endangered. Can you think of an organism that really only eats a single kind of food? There's a very famous example. Whenever they have babies, it's all over the newspaper. Come on, really? Panda. Yes! Kung Fu Panda, I was going to say. So, yes, that's right. Giant pandas, because the only thing they eat is bamboo shoots. And so, I mean, even if you feed them at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., you're going to have to find bamboo shoots to feed them. And they do, and then you can watch them. So, in this case, you find that there is a lot of complexity in most food webs because you don't have a one-to-one relationship between predators and prey. Predators can eat multiple things, and prey can be eaten by multiple things. So, there's always more than a one-to-one relationship. So if you look at the consumption, for example, what we go through, we can act at several levels of these of consumption, and so as a consequence, we can take different functions. We are, of course, omnivores because we eat producers and we eat consumers. So there are quite a variety of omnivores, and we are an example of those. So without going through this in great detail, you can see that it's complex. And one of the ways by which you can see it is complex is that yes, you have a single level of producers, and those are plants, and you have a single level of primary consumers, and those are organisms that only eat plants. But as you go higher up, you see that some organisms have more than one resource. So here, for example, you have a bird which can eat both only plant material and it can eat some insects. Or you have tertiary consumers that can also act as secondary consumers, and quaternary consumers that can act as tertiary and secondary consumers as well. So food webs can be very tricky to deal with, and in fact, if you go to most environments, it's almost impossible to draw a nice, neat diagram of how many of these interactions actually are in existence. In most cases, one would say anything goes. Almost anything goes when it comes to food webs. And that's the end of part 2.